So, welcome to another episode of DigiFlixx. My name is Yvette Mendez, and I'm your host this evening. And we have author David Valentine Bernard, and he is the author of the book The Thirsty Earth. So, welcome, Mr. Bernard.
Thank you for having me.
Good. How are you today?
Very tired from being up at 3 a.m., but energized now.
Okay, so you have a busy life, I presume.
Yeah, busy, especially now that I'm moving
Okay.
to Jamaica. So I have like 4 days to empty out my house.
Okay. All right.
So that adds to it.
All right. Well, again, we welcome you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us please start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
So I was born in Grenada. When I was about 4, I left for Canada. Spent 2 years in Canada, then I returned to Grenada until I was 9. Then I came to America. And so I always say that I always had this sort of strange nationality, parts of many things.
Okay.
So raised in Brooklyn, then went to college in Pennsylvania. Then got into this sort of, I guess, business world. Worked on Wall Street for some period of time. Had time to write some books in my spare time, which is actually the good thing about the Wall Street jobs is that I was able to save money so that I can quit and write.
Right, explore other things.
But yeah, that was my whole, I guess, modus operandi in working in these places. That they paid well, and then I could get the hell out of there.
Okay.
Before they started to pollute me. So more recently, I worked as a database manager for this HIV program in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm finishing up my PhD. As I said, I'm about to leave for Jamaica where I'm about to do some research on development in the Caribbean.
And why now? So why the decision to do that right now?
I think it's probably precipitated by working in the HIV program.
Okay.
I mean, the thing about me I've noticed is that whenever I have these jobs, I always get motivated to quit and do something else.
Okay.
Sometimes it was writing, now it's, I guess, finish up my PhD.
Okay.
So I always look for new adventures whenever things get too stale. And now, I guess my next adventure is going to be finishing the PhD, and then I'll figure out what I want to do after that.
Okay. All right. So now, speaking about adventures, can we jump right in? Because our main character in this book, The Thirsty Earth, Shango, he's a young boy, 12 years old, and the story really takes place in about a span of about 2 weeks. And would you call his experience an adventure? What would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I think I guess I go take a step back. I say my whole philosophy on writing is always to give something new and provocative. I was just thinking about it. My way over here is that whenever I write something, I want it to be someone to say, "Oh, well, I've never read anything like that before," or that they'll have the same feeling that I felt when I read like a John Steinbeck novel or a Richard Wright novel, or just something that was very provocative, and I thought to myself, wow, that's something that I would like to do. So that's the same thing that I aspire to whenever I write, that I want the reader to have a unique experience, but also to have something to think about after they close. He or she closes the final page, and that was my goal with The Thirsty Earth. Strangely enough, it's one of those books where I got the title first and then the story came.
After, okay.
So the way I got the title was that I was actually in Jamaica at the time, and there was a lot of rain showers during the first couple of months that I was there, and I had these pair of shoes that would get waterlogged because there would be these huge puddles, and I used to walk to university.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that when I was walking to school, there'd be these puddles, but when I came back, the land would be dry.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was something that stuck in my head. And then when I started writing the novel, I just had the title. And then it's one of those strange books where I didn't realize where it was going until I wrote the lines about the thirsty earth, and I said, oh yeah, now it all fits together.
Absolutely.
But for some strange reason, it was just a title that I was trying to figure out what it was going to mean, and how it was all going to fit together.
And throughout the book, we definitely see the references made to the thirsty earth up on the mountain. And so can you let us know, what is this book about? I mentioned Shango, but what is the story?
So it's essentially about a 12-year-old boy and this, I guess, anonymous or fictitious Caribbean island who wakes up one day to discover that his grandmother, who's his only living relative on the island, has died.
Mm-hmm.
So from one perspective, it's about his survival and his sort of budding awareness of what's going on in his world. So I guess you have the sense that before that time he was just typical. Well, maybe not typical, because he's unusually smart. Mm-hmm. But he was, I guess, an unconscious person who was just going through the world, I guess, as many of us do, without fully realizing what's going on. So after the trauma of realizing that his grandmother's dead, he then heads down into town to tell the authorities what has happened, because he doesn't have a phone in this place because he's up on the mountain. And so when he's heading down, this Range Rover forces him off the road, and he's so enraged that he takes up the stone and he flings it at it. So he's, it's just an impulse, but he's not expecting it to connect. But when it does, and then the Range Rover flies off the road, you have a series of events where initially he's worried that, he just killed some people. But then you have this much wider plot where there's something going on with government officials and so forth. So that was all a way of linking in not only Shango, but other people in the country, the political atmosphere, the economics, some of the cultural issues and so forth that are taking place in that country. So I guess I'll leave it at there.
Ned, so one of the things that I heard you mention is that you say a fictitious island, but you really weave some heavy-duty issues in here where you talk about the Chinese, you talk about a road, you know how this road gets built, you talk about a loan. So was it intentional to make references to an island that many of us can make those connections to?
Well, the way I look at it is that, again, if you're conscious of what's going on in many of these Caribbean countries, then you know that's basically just a fact of life. That I remember the line is that the road was washed away in a hurricane, and then the
Ivan is mentioned.
Well, I don't think I mentioned any hurricane by name,
okay.
but
all right.
You can extrapolate.
Okay.
So the roads washed away, and then the government officials get this loan, but then all of a sudden you see that they start building all these marinas and getting all these yachts, and so the line is that the people are going to pay for the misbegotten luxuries of their leaders. And I think that unfortunately that's one of the realities of not only the Caribbean but many developing countries is that the leaders have sort of figured out how to get resources out of disaster, which is basically what's happening. So that's where I was going with that.
Okay. Now, in terms of Shango and his experiences throughout the book, we also, he is a child, but he's experiencing so much pain and just so much disaster in his life in this 2-week period. He's also battling with being an adult at the same time.
Well, I made him 12 because I figured that was a good age where he's just on the verge of manhood, but his body is all prepubescent. And I remember in one point, he has this kind of strange relationship with his teacher, in that he was originally, he would have all these fantasies about her, but all his fantasies were more like a son to a mother than a man to a woman, because in the book, his mother is of course gone, has been gone since he was 7. So for 5 years, essentially, he's been on his own. And one, he doesn't have a sense of his own manhood, but he's sort of trying to figure everything out. And at one point, he sort of starts to realize that his old fantasies about his teacher in particular are stupid. Yeah. So I think that's a lot of the process of becoming an adult, is recognizing when you're thinking stupid things and doing stupid things. And in Shango's case, he does that several times throughout the novel, where he's beginning to get a grasp of what's going on in his world and what things he needs to hold on to and what things he needs to get rid of.
Right.
And I think that is the process of becoming an adult.
Okay. And so even the introduction of this character, Maitland, who ends up becoming a friend, well, someone that he ends up calling a friend, but many of the adults in his world essentially despise this person to some degree. They don't seem to have a lot of respect for him. Why this character to end up being the one that Shango would eventually make some kind of connection to?
I think it's I think it was essentially that sort of character, because once Shango is himself a sort of outcast in society, and he's trying, for one thing, Maitland is the only one who really deals with him honestly.
Yeah.
And a lot of the adults in his life, even when he tries to go to them about his mother, they either ignore him or preoccupied with their perversions. To sit, just to take a moment to listen to him. And Maitland offers something that's unique in that he actually listens to Shango. And he does so without any sense of judgment. But in a larger sense, I think that Maitland represents also a kind of old school political philosophy that if you grew up in the 70s, I don't want to say this book has anything to do with Grenada, but you could tell that he was a sort of leftist, and that he grew up at a time, or he came to consciousness, Maitland that is, at a time when the intellectuals were trying to think about how to raise their countries up and gain a certain amount of independence, not just invite in investors, but to have a genuine independence for the people living in the country, and make sure that the people are trying to, rise up, as one, not just a few wealthy people here and there, but to increase the general welfare of the whole nation. And Maitland is a sort of anachronistic character in that he still believes in these things when many of the other leaders do not, obviously. And what I don't think I went out of my way to do it, but what you see is that Maitland is also a very flawed character. Well, one thing, he's a slob. Right. I pointed at a certain time that he has these sort of flawed sort of logic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of essential to always point out. I think characters are more real when they have certain distinguishable flaws.
Yeah. So they're not perfect. I mean,
yeah,
they're relatable.
I don't think I put any thought into that, but it's just one of those things that evolved naturally, in that he just had to have some real flaws and some real attractive characteristics. And towards the end, he was the only real friend that Shango had.
Absolutely. And I thought what was also really interesting in terms of that Shango-Maitland relationship, at one point in time, Shango was really questioning Maitland in terms of he's so interested in getting to the bottom that in some instances the most logical things may be beyond his thinking. Like in other words, that maybe there's always some kind of conspiracy behind. The government is trying to hide something, or there's something we don't know. And I thought that was really interesting because, again, here's this young boy who, but he saw a lot of it with his own eyes, so which is why he was able to distinguish that. But
so that's something that I've actually experienced myself. A lot of times the so-called intellectuals, well, let me give you one concrete example. When I was in Jamaica, my landlady was telling me how Osama bin Laden, well, when I was there, Osama bin Laden had been killed. Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh no, we all know that he was killed way before that. And then the U.S. is just bringing him out now to, I don't really remember what her logic was, but to her, obviously he'd been killed way before, and now they're just bringing him out at this point to get some gains. I thought to myself, well, if he was dead a long time ago, wouldn't his own people say, hey, he was been dead a long time ago? The U.S. is just doing that.
The reverse of what she's saying. Yeah.
But I think a lot of times people they believe in these conspiracies so strongly that they end up ignoring a lot of common sense. Yeah. So I think that it's sort of essential as a thinker that you not ignore what's the obvious, even no matter how much you want to believe in the evil of leaders or whatever conspiracy you want to bring up, that you not lose sight of essential common sense. So that's one thing that I added for that. I don't think I put any thought into it, but it's just one of those things, again, that sort of evolved naturally.
Yeah, but I definitely thought it was an important point that came through.
Yeah, I think I didn't want... Shango is like the only truly honest character. For as you said before, he's seen so much that no one else has seen, and he's privy to a lot of facts that no one else is privy to. Yeah. And at the same time, he has to keep his own secrets because he can't let anyone know that his grandmother's dead, because then he has this whole nightmarish image of some sort of Victorian workhouse where they're going to send him as an orphan or something. So he wants to keep his independence, but at the same time he wants to advance as an adult, or as someone who's worthy of doing something special in the world. So that was my thought in that.
So is any part of Shango you, or are you any part of Shango?
I would say no, but obviously I think there's always some little piece of you in the characters, but in general I try not to put myself into any of the books or to put anyone that I know in any of the books.
Okay.
Because let me go off on a tangent actually, because there's one person who asked me to put her name in the book.
Uh-huh.
And it was very distracting. And I forced myself to only put her name in one paragraph because I didn't want to think about it.
Okay.
Anytime I thought I was reading that section, it was just very annoying.
Okay.
And I don't, because I would think of her when I'm reading this character's name, which is not something that I want to do. I always want to think about the character, free of any other entanglements. So Shango is not me, not anyone that I know, but he's someone that I would like to know. Okay. And that's what I always try to strive for any of my characters.
All right. Now, one of the things that occurred in the book when there was a lot of, military, it was just heightened military presence around the island, that impacted the young people as well in terms of political parties. Mm-hmm. Okay, why did you include that? I mean, I thought that was really interesting that, again, it trickled all the way down. And in many instances, what do children really know about political parties?
But they don't. I don't think adults even know a lot about political parties, to be honest with you.
And actually, one of the things you highlight is that there's really not much of a difference between the political parties. Yeah,
especially in Caribbean politics. What I find is that if you look at them, there's no real difference between the parties, and yet when you talk to the people, they're all adamant that the other party is so horrible. When they believe the same things, they do the same things. The leaders went to the same schools. Mm-hmm. They're pretty much indistinguishable. But what it is that the whole political party phenomenon is that they give largesse, or I want to say bribe, but that's essentially it. You know that if your party comes into power, you're gonna get your extra $100 or whatever they do to get your vote. So that's basically all it is. It's essentially a kind of popularity show, and the way that the children relate to it in the book is that they relate to it in the way that a child relates to the popular person. The new popular person is in. Therefore, you're not going to be dealing with that clique anymore. You're going to be dealing with the popular clique. And it's the same phenomenon. Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, that it shows a lack of evolution, a lack of sophistication, political sophistication, where you can be so easily manipulated. And I think that was the point that Shango was raising, in that they were so easily manipulated. Yeah. When, if you just sat and thought about it carefully, you saw there really was no difference between the political parties, and that the leaders were just using them.
Yeah. And again, that it impacted children. I think that was really powerful. Yeah. And one of the other things is, at one point in time, Shango states something about how he is now ready for war, and he takes on this persona that he can undertake revenge. Mm-hmm. And in many instances throughout the book, we see that is each time when he experiences something, it's this revenge that he wants to go after. Is that something that you think normally young people would do? That's like his child, again, that battle that he was experiencing, child, adult.
Yeah.
But he also saw it that, look, the adults can do what they want. The ones in power get to do what they want.
I'm trying to talk about it without discussing this scene too much. Let me see. I think that you sort of hit on some of it in that a lot of what Shango does is childish, but to a certain extent, a lot of what his society is doing is childish. And you can look at that as a larger metaphor on not only Shango trying to reach adulthood, but a society trying to reach a certain sort of adulthood. In terms of, again, political sophistication, or in terms of thinking honestly about what's going on in society. So that's, you can read into that
Okay,
if you wish.
That's fine. I loved also that there was this contrast, particularly through Shango's eyes, about this island, that there's the beauty and then there's the ugliness. So like anytime he went to town, he was always talking about how ugly it was. You know, environmental issues came up, the bottles, and you know, the mountain where he lived just seemed like this pure place. And I just thought that was really beautiful. The flower that he saw there that kind of helped, you know, keep himself together, so to speak, was like an inspiration for him.
That's probably one of the few instances where I can say that's me.
Okay.
In that, I remember when I returned to Grenada, like the first time, after, let's see, I left when I was 9, I returned when I was 20-something. And there's this beach, Grand Anse Beach, which in my childhood was like this paradise. There were these, you know, the whole thing, the palm trees, the crabs playing, the clear blue water, and you know, the everything that you would associate with a beach. And you, growing up as a child, growing the Grand Anse Beach on a Sunday or whenever you got a free time, was just like paradise. But I remember when I returned that the beach was polluted. They had, I went for a swim and there was this algae in it. They had cut down many of the palm trees to build these very ugly hotels on the edge of the beach, which when there was a storm surge, it washed away a lot of the hotels. So there was no planning into it. I mean, obviously the edge of a beach is not the place to build anything. 2, they ripped down a lot of the things that made the beach special. The palm trees, no crabs are on the beach anymore. So, and on top of all that, I remember there was a lot of these plastic bottles, like Shango. And one day I became so disillusioned that I just went to the store and I bought these garbage bags and I began just cleaning up the beach myself. And I remember the very annoying thing was that these people would stop and look at me like I was insane because I was, you know, trying to be a steward to the environment. And that, I think that was one of the things that disillusioned me about Grenada.
Okay.
I don't want to go down that route, but I think that a lot of times in the Caribbean, people don't put some thought into their not only the environment but their own livelihood, because why your whole economy is built around tourism. But why is anyone going to come to this polluted beach that's strewn with plastic bottles and garbage? I mean, just put some thought into it, you know, and protect the environment. Not only for some sort of hippie sort of motive, but 1, you're going to be healthier if the environment's healthy. 2, you're going to get more money because people are going to want to come back to your beach. And I remember in one instance I was sitting on the beach and there were these two white girls sun tanning or whatever they were doing. And this stray dog came up and started to use the bathroom in the sand. So I kicked some sand at it and it ran away. But I was thinking, people have to give more thought to one, the whole presentation of their island, and to do things like to spay and neuter these stray dogs so that you don't have a million of them defecating on the beach or digging in garbage or wandering around with these sores or whatever the case is. So just put some thought into it. I mean, people talk about development as building these huge structures or roads or whatever the case is, but it's simpler than that. It's just, I think it's a matter of having a certain amount of pride in your own country, in your own environment, and it's like I think of it as a house, in that if you have a house and you only clean it up when someone's going to visit it, or you only clean up the foyer because that's all they're going to see, and the rest of the house is a dump, you're not a very good housekeeper. And I think that as Caribbean people, we should give more thought to how we keep our house.
Okay. I definitely think that that's a deeper conversation, because there are budget constraints that have to go along with that.
No, really, it's not really a budget issue. I totally disagree with that. How much thought does it take not to throw a plastic bottle in the gutter?
Right. But I mean, you also spoke about a couple other things like dogs and...
Even it's not expensive to cut two things in a dog.
All right. I hear you. But then is that also to say that...
It's not a budgetary issue, it's a consciousness issue.
Okay. So then, to some degree, though, would you also say that, maybe in some islands, some people don't see the islands, the people who live there in some instances don't really see the beauty that they have. But I mean, there are always people who are influxing, as you say, tourism is, the baby of many of the islands, but they have it 365 days a week of the year, right? So, they may not see it the way someone else who comes in for 1 week. I'm not saying that's an excuse. I'm just saying, is that maybe...
I don't think that's a relevant point.
So then why?
Because
why would someone...
For instance, I as a small child saw the beauty of it.
Okay.
And...
But I'm going to pause you right there.
Okay.
You as a child saw the beauty of it. I must say, however, today in a lot of the Caribbean islands, I mean, let's think about all the influences that kids have when they watch TV, if it's MTV or any of the Disney shows. They're being influenced by a lot of other things now that,
That's totally true. I remember, again, on my first visit back to the island in my 20s, the first thing I saw when I got out of the airport was Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut.
Okay.
And then I went to the place where I was staying and they were watching MTV. So in a strange sense, they were more Americanized than I was.
Yeah. And
for instance, I'm a vegetarian, so that the whole Kentucky Fried Chicken thing wouldn't be happening with me, but just their whole mindset and what their goals were. I mean, when I was growing up, my idea of fun was going down to Tantine and playing in the park. Now it's, hey, let's watch The Young and the Restless or whatever they're into now. So you're right. There has a lot of the mentality has changed, but I think that they really do have to think more deeply about one, what they want, and what's realistic for them, and also I think more fundamentally what their present goals are going to result in the future. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, but I mean, I think then it's wonderful. The reason that you're going into the work that you do, my hope is that you will be able to help make a bigger impact, since that's part of what you're going to be undertaking.
I don't know. I try not to think about anything that I do in any sort of self-sacrificing mode. Everything I do because I find it personally interesting.
Okay.
And I think that that's pretty much all you can do. You can't think about any potential rewards that you may have or potential benefits that your activity may have, because it leads you into a lot of dishonesty, I think. All you can do is say, I'm personally interested in this thing. These are the reasons why I'm doing it, and what I'm trying to accomplish, and leave it at that. If there are positive benefits, and I of course hope that they are, then that's a plus, but I keep it simple.
Okay. I'm just going to take us to the very beginning of the book, because in the beginning we hear this mango dropping on the top of the roof, and of course by the time Shango wakes up in the morning, his grandmother has passed at that point in time. But I thought it was interesting because I believe that you wrote that he remembers during the course of the night his grandmother actually, like, she had some kind of, whether it was a cough or he thought that she moved. And I thought that was really interesting because it was like, to some degree, it's almost like he did have a final experience of his grandmother. I mean, it was something that it was just my personal connection that, he did actually have something that he heard her.
But what happens is that the mango falls on the roof, and she has a heart attack from the sound.
Right, and what I'm saying, he doesn't realize that's what. Right, that's what I mean, is that he actually did have an experience of her, but not realizing what it was. I thought that was really interesting. So that really
thought so.
Okay. So what pleased you most about this book? What are you most pleased about?
That's a very difficult question, but I think that, as with all my books, what pleased me was that it was original, and I had somehow managed to carry out something that I always wanted to do. I think it's my best book.
Okay.
In that, one, just in terms of the narrative, the way that it flows, the way that I think I'm able to hold the interest, even though it's, for a lot of the book, he's just by himself. But he's thinking so many different things, and he's seeing so many things. Yet there's this, I don't think it feels isolated. It's like he's experiencing something grand, and I think that what pleased me was that he was able to have this great adventure and this great experience, this great moment where he was expanding intellectually, and if you want to use the word spiritually as well, and experiencing so many things that people don't normally experience. Also, when I was writing it, I used to joke that it was my Great Caribbean novel.
Okay.
I guess I play on the Great American Novel sort of thing. But I wanted to write something, I wouldn't say a definitive Caribbean book, but a book that looks at just a lot of the mindset of Caribbean people. I remember in the first couple of pages, in the first scene actually, you see that his whole orientation is to America. I say that America is his personal paradise because he thinks of it as this land where everything is happening. I mean, I was probably like the people that I met when I returned to Grenada watching MTV, and the whole mindset was, let's get some Kentucky Fried Chicken and watch MTV and cable and The Young and the Restless. So like them, Shango's whole orientation is toward America, but toward as the novel progresses, one, he begins to see the beauty of his own island, but he's also seeing that the people of America aren't very nice some of the time, and that in a strange way there's a sort of hardness to them, and that he's just discovering, but that's all part of his process of becoming an adult and beginning to think through things more logically and more completely. So those are my thoughts.
All right. Okay. And then, of course, something else that Shango finds out during the course of his 2-week period adventure, he actually gets to meet his dad, which he hadn't known for all that time. He had heard so many essentially negative things about him, and there he was, like almost like right in his backyard, so to speak. His dad was right there, and
the whole I don't know what sort of possessed me to write that, but I think it was sort of essential that he get rid of all illusions. And what we find with the way that he meets his father is that when he learns of him, he has all these fantasies about his father, and he begins to think of himself as this sort of fairy tale prince who's going to return to this kingdom where his father is reigning over everything. And once again, his meeting his father and being disabused of those fantasies is all part of his process of becoming a more complete human being. I won't say an adult, but that's the way I think about it.
But sad at the same time. You just feel so... I personally just... I mean, I felt for this young man along the way.
You notice also that when he leaves meeting his father, that he's stronger.
Oh, absolutely.
So, in life, even though there's sadness, sometimes you emerge from the encounter with more strength, and I think that happens a lot in the novel. That he's continually trying to become stronger. Inadvertently, of course, but the way that he progresses is to try to deal with things honestly and to see things honestly, and through that he gains a certain amount of strength.
And you know, you talk about strength, and you also mentioned about the culture of the Caribbean, and I thought what was also beautiful was that during the story he talks about how strong he had been getting all along, just from the things in his grandmother's garden, you know, the root crops and...
the whole nutritional aspect. I mean, like, I don't mean to harp on Kentucky Fried Chicken, but there's one of the stranger aspects of the nutrition in the Caribbean is that people now attach a certain amount of prestige to these sort of processed foods, like canned goods and so forth. If you can buy your corned beef or whatever the case is, then you've reached a certain status. I mean, one of my friends who's working now in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, she was telling me how she would get these breadfruit, and was how much she enjoyed them, but that the local people would say that those were poor time foods. And in order to sort of prove that they're doing well, they would buy these processed foods, imported foods, and it's a sort of strange mindset. And in the case of Shango, because he couldn't afford all these things, what happened was that he was actually stronger physically because he was only eating the things out of his grandmother's garden, the fresh callaloo, the
that had
fruits
all the
and
nutrients.
vegetables. Yeah. And I talk about how when he's playing sports with other kids, that he runs these circles around them because he's well nourished, and yet he doesn't, of course, know that he's benefiting from this lifestyle. He just thinks of it as not being able to afford these sort of luxury goods.
Yeah, and as you made that comment about Kentucky Fried Chicken, because during his time he ends up cooking for himself, preparing, but never is there meat. There's no kind of meat. The things that he prepares for himself, it's never meat. It's just things that he's gotten right from the garden, the peas and
I don't think he's a. I didn't intend for him to be a vegetarian, but now that you mention it, I don't think I was trying to impose my own value system, but a lot of the times people do eat sort of beans and squash and so forth. I mean, traditionally, meat was typically something that people only ate as a sort of celebratory food and so forth. But you notice that in the beginning I say that they used to have pigs and the chickens.
Yes.
But they were eaten out. They were killed.
Right.
So he's not a vegetarian. It's just a coincidence.
And again, that thirsty earth, which has taken all, references are made to that as well. Like he felt like everything was just, being taken away. There's a scene in the book where a military truck comes along and the soldiers end up taking all the mangoes that Shango is selling. But then a day or so after, or later on that day, he ends up leaving a can because he has to go and do other things, go to school. And when he returns, he finds out that there is money in the can. And his statement was something like, he felt like his soul was restored because of that. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let me give you some background on that. So when his grandmother died, he finds obviously that he needs to make some kind of income. And the only thing that's lucrative enough on the property are these gigantic mangoes that his grandfather brought from another Caribbean island during World War II. So when Shango sells these mangoes the first day, it sort of gives him some hope that he can survive on his own. And there's this scene where there's these tourists come up the mountain and he sells them some mangoes, and he certainly feels optimistic about his ability to survive. And what happens in that soldier scene is that they take all his mangoes without paying. And of course that raises his anger and his feeling of victimization and helplessness. But at the same time, he has no choice but to continue to sell these mangoes because he needs the money. So as school is beginning to progress and so forth, he has to go to school, of course. So he decides on this whim that he's going to leave these mangoes out again. And he goes to school and has this very horrible day. And he's returning home not feeling good about anything. But then he sees that this can that he's left out in the morning, thinking that he just leave it there with this note saying, "Leave what you think is right." That he sees that the can somehow has money in it, and that the people of the island aren't these thugs who are going to take his mangoes without paying, but that there's some kind of social fabric, that there's something special, or I should say something essential is still existing in this society that makes it function. So this gives him hope, and I think that I guess I had the same reaction as you when I'm sort of writing these things, that it needed some hope at that point in the novel, and for him just seeing that there were some good people still on the island, it was something that was necessary.
And something wonderful that happened to Shango during this is that he is the winner from his school to be part of this national competition, and he ends up winning that competition, which is amazing. But the very night that he's celebrating, again, at the same time, it's this wonderful thing, but it's almost like, again, there are more adults in the world that he's kind of like Xing off and just being like, here we go again. It's almost like the world was great. He won this competition, but at the same time, it's like, look at these adults around me. They're horrible, some of them.
I don't know if that's exactly the way I intended it. I think by the time he's through with the competition, well, for one thing, he goes into the competition with this kind of revenge feeling that you mentioned before. But he pretty much obliterates them.
Right.
The competition, that is. And
but at dinner time, dinner time, he now, what would you say his feelings for the teacher at this point in time is? His own teacher at that point in time, he just has lost all respect for her, so to speak.
I don't want to go into that too much, but what I will say is that on that point, it's all part of his process of becoming more complete and getting rid of some of these illusions that he had harbored. And in that scene, which I won't go into too much, he's also realizing what the grand mystery of the whole novel was.
Yeah.
So
amazing unfolding, I must say, of the story, because that was great. That was really good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Shocking. Shocking.
It is shocking, but I will say that particular circumstance is something that I won't say I've experienced, but that it is based on something that actually happened.
Okay.
So I don't think I intended to write that knowingly, but it's one of those things that as the book evolved, I saw that as a way of tying a lot of things together. And if you think about it, it really does make a lot of sense. I'm trying to talk about it and not give away the ending at the same time, which is difficult.
Right.
So I guess readers contacted me with your questions, I guess.
Okay, that's fair.
when you've reached the ending.
So speaking of the ending, as I saw that I was getting closer to the last page, and then I read the last page, I wanted more. I felt like I needed more of Shango, but then as I turned more, I went on to see, okay, so there's another book coming where we find Shango as an adult, and the book is going to be called When the Devil Remembers Who He Is. Okay, so what's that all about? In this book, we actually will get some excerpts so we can find out.
There's a sneak preview, the first 15 pages of the new novel. And the title, When the Devil Remembers Who He Is, comes out of a conversation that Maitland and Shango have. So Maitland's telling him this story. They're driving along, and Maitland thinks of this story that's going to demonstrate a point. So it's the story is that in the beginning of time there was, of course, nothing, and then nothing but chaos and, galaxies and so forth. But out of the universe came these two entities. So one was dedicated totally to chaos and violence and so forth, and this entity came to be known as the devil. Mm-hmm. The other entity was dedicated to order, and over time they started to battle one another. But they found like the new universe, if you know science, there's the notion of the conservation of energy where matter can neither be created nor destroyed. Mm-hmm. So these two entities which came out of the universe are like that. They can't be destroyed. No matter how much they fight against one another, they're always going to exist. So what happens is that one day God comes upon this master plan in which he would create the earth and sort of dupe the devil into thinking that he's something that he's not. Mm-hmm. So how he does that is by he realized that he can make the devil forget who he is, and then he puts him on earth as a regular human being and populates the earth with people whose only purpose is to keep the devil from realizing who he is, and gives him a wife and children and so forth, so that the devil will be preoccupied with these things. So the crux of that particular story is that Maitland is saying that he's waiting for the time when the devil remembers who he is, because the meaning of the story is that everyone on earth exists only for the purpose of continuing this illusion to keep the devil preoccupied. So they want to exist for their own purpose, and the only way that's going to happen is when the devil remembers who he is. So that's where that the title comes from. Okay. So in the new novel, Shango's an adult. It takes place about 13 years afterwards. Mm-hmm. He's working for a corporation in New York City, and the whole idea is that the corporation decides that one day they're going to buy his island. Mm-hmm. And that since Shango is working for the company and they know he's from that island, they try to enlist him to be the figurehead of the whole push to buy the island. Okay. So there's going to be a referendum on the island, and it's essentially Shango's job to convince the people that they should buy. Mm. But obviously, he thinks it's obviously farcical. He thinks obviously that there's no way that his people can or will agree to something so egregious. But he begins to see when he gets down there that they've sort of bought into it, and that they actually think of it as a good idea to sell themselves to this corporation. Mm-hmm. So the book is about another step in his evolution, or his, I guess you could say, maturity, because at this point in his life, he's sort of lost himself again. He's successful, but he's sort of lost himself spiritually. Mm-hmm. And his sort of fighting for the island is a way to sort of reclaim it and to become, as I was saying before, stronger.
Okay. So he continues with that battle even after all this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say that life is about constantly trying to improve and to figure out your weaknesses. Even with myself, I always want to keep learning new things. Mm-hmm. Not only in the writing, but that's why I'm going to school again. Just to learn new possibilities, to experience new things. And it's like that with Shango. He's not obviously writing anything, but he's trying to get a better sense of who he is. And the title, When the Devil Remembers Who He Is, is not only about the metaphor that I mentioned before with the people being nothing but props for the devil to keep him preoccupied, but it's about all of us. We all need from time to time to remember who we are. I think it's easy for a lot of us, especially when we reach adulthood and begin to enter middle age and old age, that we sometimes forget who we are, forget what originally motivated us to try to do certain things. And the second book is about Shango remembering, or trying to remember.
Okay, very beautiful. So before we say goodbye, I just want us to be able to take a look at a couple of your other books. The Last Dream Before Dawn. Which one was the first book that you wrote?
I've ordered them. This is my first book, The Last Dream Before Dawn. It was originally called God's Bastard Sons, but the publisher thought that was very heretical.
Okay.
So we decided on that title. Okay. It's about I would say it's about what would happen if the Rodney King event, Columbine, Amadou Diallo shooting, and all these things happen in New York City in the space of a few weeks, essentially. Okay. So it's about society, I guess, entering chaos and people trying to reach some kind of logic about what is going on.
So and a couple of the other
titles. A lot more going on in this one. This
God
one
in the Image of Woman.
Oh yeah, God in the Image of Woman. My second book, it's like 800 pages. That one I sort of wrote over like 7 years. Remember being in South Africa and writing some of it. What happens is that in the future, people lose the ability to have daughters. So as the world begins to seep into chaos, some people begin to believe that this 10-year-old black girl is going to be the next Messiah. So it's about people's assumptions about God, but it's also about desperation and trying to come to grips with reality, I guess you might say. Okay. So it's obviously there's a lot going on in that book, but it's again, as with the previous book, it's about trying to reclaim your humanity, because in a certain sense, as I show in the book, being branded as God, as the case of this girl, brings with it these horrible consequences and this horrible burden, which she has to sort of beat off in order to claim her humanity. So that's sort of what that book is about.
Okay.
Even though there's a lot more.
So the raw essentials of human sexuality.
Yeah, this is a book that it's actually a horror book, but my publisher made it look like this romance novel. So from time to time, annoyed people contact me thinking that, wait, this wasn't a romance book. So what happens is that it revolves around this character called
Charles Martin.
Yeah, there you go, Martin. So it's about people trying to go through the world without, I guess, understanding what's happening to them. And
intimate relations with strangers.
Yes. So this is about This is my second best book.
Okay.
It was my best book until I wrote that one.
Okay.
So, what that's about, well, let me say what it comes out of. It sort of came out of my bewilderment with the Iraq War, and just with people's inability to sort of see what was going on. So what happens is that in the future, there is a bombing at the White House, and this time the president is killed, a lot of the cabinet and so forth. And this time it's found out that an African country in the Sahara is responsible for the event, supposedly. So we invade this country, again trying to right wrongs.
So as we can see, we have a wide selection, different topics, but again, we'll take it back, the Thirsty Earth. Everyone, this is David Valentine Bernard. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right.